All right, Batman, if you can hear me. I don't know, put a giant bat in the sky for me. You know what I'm talking about with Batman, right? Hello. Can anybody hear? Put up a thumbs up, please. Yeah, that's what I'm looking for. Okay. Just checking. There we go. Awesome. Batman. Okay. So we do have some options today. I couldn't see. Darn it. Yeah, we have some options today. So the firewall lecture that I was going to do right now, we mostly did in 2515. So there's slight differences, so I can zoom through that, and that's fine. Basically, I could turn this into a work period, or I can move on to like open protocols, which is probably the best thing to do. But I wanted to give you the option. If your time is a little limited right now, and you'd rather just have that for a work period, then I'll just kind of put in a couple of options here. So Matt talks for work period. And just thumbs up what works for you, what you'd prefer to do. And I'll just go by majority rule here. If you don't lecture now, it'll happen anyway. The inevitability of Matt talking. You guys too, your local ones, you can join and just kind of give your opinion, or you can just tell me what you think. Like we got 2-1, but you know that's not a lot of people voting right now. Yeah. People are now it's 2-2, but you broke the tie, so it's 3-2. What do you think, Jacob? Do you want a work period, or do you want me to lecture? Okay, we're tied at 3-3. Oh no, wait. Matt talks. That takes it. We're done. Okay. Matt's gonna talk. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll do a bit of firewalls, just the part that kind of relates to mail. It's going to be super fast because it'll be very familiar. And then open protocols. I'll get into that. Okay, so this is really tiny. There's not much to do here. Or it's review, depending on how you feel about it. Okay, so basically I'm just going to focus on mail-specific firewall requirements. I'm not going to really dance around all the rest of the stuff. We know about PF-Sense. We know about implementing your own, although I might go into some of the little details. Testing and troubleshooting your setup. So I'm going to skip this part because we've talked about it. We're not using network address translation in mail server. So you did use that in 2515, but it's not really something we have to worry about. Okay. Now what we do have to worry about is different ports. The general approach is the same, but the ports that we're mostly concerned with are DNS, SMTP, POP3, and IMAP. Okay, those are the ones that really need to function. There's also a little bit of LDAP in there. So I do mention there are other ports that are needed, and those show up in the docket and log docs. But if you get these functioning, then the rest of them should be pretty easy to set up in a similar manner. Okay. The main issue I think you got to watch out for is you might make a rule, but is it on the right network card? Every time you make a rule, you loosen something up going from LAN to OP1, let's say. LAN, first of all, is super open, but OP1 typically isn't. But when you're making a rule in OP1 that's allowing a message to go to the LAN, you also have to allow a message to come back, right? So that's something to keep in mind. When you first start out, you might be super loose and allowing things through, but we want that to be tightened up over time, right? And so often you need a couple of rules to allow a two-way communication to take place. Not always, though. It depends what you're doing. I won't do port no, I won't do port forwarding. DMZs I did talk about, and that is the focus of this particular assignment is setting up firewall rules, at least for part 1 and 3. Setting up firewall rules and punching holes to and from the demilitarized zone. Okay. I think you understand the concept of it, so I don't think we need to go into that too much. Now, what does the edge server need? The edge server needs DNS on port 23, SMTP on ports 25 and 2525, and LDAP on these weird ports, 5389 and 5636. If you don't have these opened up and functioning, and some of them need TCP and UDP, some of them just need TCP. Okay. DNS, if you just have UDP, will probably work fine. TCP is a more recent addition for kind of encrypted DNS and stuff like that. However, for LDAP, you want both of them open. Okay, so that's something that you got to consider in your rules. 2525, I don't know what Microsoft is doing with that, but they've listed it as one of the ports that should be open. I think it's either an encrypted version of SMTP or it's a backup port that can be used in the event that 25 is taken. So it's some kind of proprietary modification on their part. I don't know what they're doing exactly, but I'm just opening, I'm saying open a hole because they said open a hole, basically. Now, the LDAP stuff, that's all about querying Active Directory. Okay. DNS is also about querying Active Directory, really, and resolving host names, etc. So that's really how we discover mail accounts. And you notice that we're not really mentioning POP3 and IMAP, and that's because Exchange uses Outlook anywhere. So internally, we're not really dealing with it. And our clients are all on Linux, and they're going to be connecting to the Linux server. So we're not having to punch any POP3 and IMAP holes in our firewalls. Okay. But that certainly is something that you could have to do. It would be very similar to what you do with SMTP port 25. It would just be different numbers. Okay. PF sense, I think you guys get that pretty well, at least in terms of the basics and what it looks like. So this was just punching a rule through some of the default rules that exist, and the fact that you can move them up or down, and then they take precedence. Right? I'll skip through that. You can always refer to it later if you need it. All right, I think that's enough. Everybody feel like they're experts at firewalls at this point? Anybody have any questions about that? Do you want me to go over it a bit more, or should I just move on? I'll move on. Unless somebody says otherwise. Ding, ding, ding. It's time to move forward. All right. And that man said otherwise. I think you're a joker, actually. Okay, so the protocols SMTP, POP3, and IMAP. The Linux section of the lab is that's where we get to explore those protocols a bit. And I intentionally turned off, I decided not to use encryption at all for the Linux server, just because I wanted you to be able to interact with the protocols directly, so you can understand how they work. This can be pretty useful for Linux mentioned. Yeah, you're gonna love it by the time you're out of here. Not really, but I like it. But yeah, I want you to get a sense of the protocols. Linux is just the platform we're working on. It doesn't really matter. The protocol is the same no matter where you go. Okay. So SMTP, Simple Mail Transfer Protocol, POP3, Post Office Protocol 3, version 3. I'm not aware of a version 2, but I am aware of a version 1. So I guess the second one, kind of like the Star Wars movies, or the Star Trek movies, the second one always kind of sucks, right? I think it's the Star Trek movies. IMAP is Internet Messaging Application Protocol. So that is, we'll talk about it, but basically POP and IMAP serve similar functions. Okay, they're ways for you to access your mail. SMTP is ways for your mailboxes to get filled up. It's ways of delivering mail. Okay. So they do serve different functions, but POP and IMAP serve essentially the same function. The connection methods and how we can troubleshoot using different connection types. And then encryption, which we won't use, but the fact that it's kind of necessary these days, at least if you want to run securely. Okay, so as soon as Exchange has to talk outside of its local area network, it has to talk to, it has to use open protocols. Okay. And so open protocols are defined by RFCs, requests for comments. You might have heard that in CMIS 1014 or DMIT 1518. But basically, anybody can propose an RFC, and nobody has to adopt it. Right? So they're just proposals that are kind of formally put out there, but anybody can do it. You don't even have to necessarily identify yourself too much. And if enough people like them and they gain traction, they can become standards. Okay? But an RFC is just a proposal, essentially. Now, SMTP, POP3, IMAP, those are all based on RFC-defined protocols that eventually were adopted and became standards. Okay, and now we can't get rid of them pretty much. Now, in mail, send and receive communications are handled by separate protocols. So, if you're sending a mail, you're using SMTP. If you're receiving your mail, you're using POP3 or IMAP. Okay. And initially, it was POP3, based on certain assumptions about how people would use the internet. And when that started to change, IMAP became more of a thing. Okay. So there was a growing need for something like IMAP. We'll talk about the differences. Now, all the protocols are initiated by the host that's playing the client role in the exchange of information. But when you're dealing with SMTP, often that's server to server. So there's one server acting as a client, another server acting as the server to send mail from one domain to another domain. Okay, so the primary protocol used to send mail is SMTP, runs on port 25 TCP. And it's got a lockstep method. The protocol is not very forgiving. Okay. So it'll accept kind of one mistake, maybe, and after that it'll close the connection on you. Kind of like, I'm too busy to deal with this. Okay. So if you're not making sense to the server, it will shut the connection on you. And then when I say connection, I mean a TCP connection where you can continue to, you actually have a session state where you can issue commands, right? This is not like HTTP where you request a file and then it kind of closes stuff on you. So if you're making sense, you can keep an open connection with SMTP, but it's not meant to last that long. It's just long enough for you to send your mail. Okay. This is entirely text-based. So every command that goes to the server on the part of your client, like say Thunderbird, all of it is something that you could type potentially. Okay, and that means that a human can actually interact directly with the server if you have the right tools available. And the right tools that we can use are something like Telnet. Okay. Now, why is this useful? Well, it can give you an idea of what's going on under the hood when things are breaking. Okay. The client applications like Thunderbird or Outlook, they don't always give you properly detailed information. The server itself, on the other hand, will give you exact information about what's wrong. So we'll use those to test connections. Okay. Now, Exchange does run SMTP. Internally, it's running its own proprietary protocols, but when it's sending mail between mailbox servers, it's still routing things through SMTP. Okay. It's just when it's talking to the Windows clients, that's when it's not. Now, SendMail is an SMTP server, which is very highly respected. It's also rather complicated. So we're not going to use it because you could make your whole career SendMail, essentially. Postfix is kind of, the dummy's guide to send mail on Linux. It's widely available on Linux systems these days. Very easy to set up. And that's what we'll go with, okay? Because I don't really feel the need to turn this into a huge Linux administration kind of thing. There are other games in town, so Qmail, I've actually administered that in the past. Zimber and XM I've never worked with, but these aren't the only ones that you can use. There's lots of others, as usual with open source. So here's an example of a sample SMTP session where I'm connecting by Telnet. Okay. So what I did was I installed the Windows feature Telnet client, and then I connected to port 25 on a mail server. Okay, saunders.enron.com. And I'm actually connecting from Edron here. Okay. So every time you see a code, that's the server. And every time you just see typing, that's me. Okay. So when I first connect, it's the one that actually says something first. It goes, okay, this is the name of the server. The service is ready. Here's the time. And then I give an extended hello, EHLO. Okay. And then I'm supposed to give my host name, but I actually gave the name of the server instead. And it's still like, yeah, okay. So even though the standard says I should be giving my actual host name, it's not doing any checking, right? And it comes back and just says, hi, saunders.enron.com. This is my IP address. Okay. And then it tells me a whole bunch of details about the functionality that it supports. So that's what the 250 code is. Okay. It's saying, this is the maximum size. I support pipelining. I support TLS if you want to use it. I support NTLM authentication if you're able to use it, et cetera, et cetera. I don't know what all of these mean. I know what some of them mean. Okay. But basically, the idea is your Thunderbird client or whatever other client you're going to use to connect to it can look at that information and can then say, okay, which of these do I support? And we're going to work with a subset of these so that there's no miscommunications. It's kind of like habla español, right? That's essentially what this is saying. It's a way of testing out what functionality can be used between the client and the server. Once it's listed that and I've made my decision, I can start creating an email. And that's all I'm really trying to do. So rather than have an email that's been typed out by me and then sent, we create it on the fly. So we say mail from, colon, and that's a real command that the server expects. If I don't do that, it's going to complain and say, wait, tell me who you are as a user. Okay? And if I don't give it a satisfactory answer, it's going to close the connection on me. So I have to use the mail from command, and then I specify an email address. Now, the email address that I'm specifying here doesn't actually exist, and it doesn't care. Okay. So it's like I'm using a completely fake edge@enron.com. It goes, yeah, that's good. And then I say recipient 2, exg which does exist. Okay. And there it will actually check. And it'll say, wait a minute, that account doesn't exist. Or it'll be like, yeah, the recipient's okay. So it doesn't seem to care about the user who's sending, but it does care about who you're sending to because a mailbox needs to be at the other end. Okay. Then I type data, and everything after that is going to be treated as part of the mail message until I put a period on a line by itself. Okay. So the period on a line by itself indicates that I finished typing my message, and the server interprets it that way. So until I do that, it's just going to keep everything. It says start your mail input, end with control F dot control F. That's really new line, period, new line. Okay. So I just put subject message from the edge, Matthew Saunders, I just put my name in, and then I put the dot, and it interprets that correctly, and then it gives me back some information about the mail being queued for delivery. Okay. So what this is testing is, first of all, can we punch through the firewall from the edge server to the actual run-in mail service and get back a delivered email? Okay. So I basically described this here. It's just for future reference if you need it. Okay, so we talk directly with the SMTP server using the Telnet client. This is where if you're having weird problems with with the server, the connection's not working, dropping into a Telnet session can sometimes give you some really useful information about what's going on. So it could be that there's an incompatibility between what the server requires and what the client is capable of providing, like say TLS, right? And so when you actually connect in through Telnet, you can see that information instead of depending on your mail client to actually give you the correct information. Sometimes it just won't. It'll say something went wrong. So email applications, they do exactly the same thing that we just saw. They're actually literally sending that kind of text to the server to deliver mail. They're just hiding the details from your view. And sometimes they're obscuring stuff, right? So it may be that you're having trouble with a firewall, and Telnet can help you figure that out. It could be that there's a problem with the encryption method being used. Telnet can help you figure that out. Or you're not using encryption, but you do have to authenticate, and when you try the password, it doesn't work. That can also help indicate what the problem is. Okay, so a couple things worth noting here. When I did the subject, so if we just go back to that image there, and I put subject message from the edge, that shows up in an email, typically in its own little field, right? But there is actually no such thing as a subject field. That's just part of the data. Okay? It's only your mail client that even bothers to parse that out separately for you. SMTP doesn't care. It just sees it as data. Okay? It's the client email app that kind of parses everything out. And we're using raw ASCII. Another thing is that many email clients format data using HTML. Again, SMTP doesn't care. Okay? HTML is just ASCII, which then gets interpreted and displayed by your web client, by your mail client. Okay. No encryption was used in this session, and we're going to keep encryption out of it. It's not built into SMTP, but we can tunnel SMTP through TLS. Okay. And authentication is also optional, clearly, because we used a fake account and it didn't care, right? So a server that allows mail to be sent out without any authentication, that's called an open relay, if it allows mail out to the internet. Okay. So that's what spam comes from. When people are faking email addresses, they're usually using open relays to do that. And so you can kind of go into jurisdictions where people don't bother you about that kind of thing in order to set up spam servers. Now, it so happens that with this setup, we can use a fake email address to send a mail, but we can't use it to send it to the outside world. We can only send it within our local area network. Okay. But it is, in the case of spam, you're letting it go to the whole world. Now it's not just clients use SMTP to send mail, so servers will also do it to each other. So SMTP servers connect to each other that way. Once a client makes a send request to the server looks up the destination email server using DNS. Okay. So there's a special DNS record called a mail exchange record or a MX record to identify SMTP servers. So I'll just pop this into terminal client here. I'm already here. Now if I just do NS lookup, I'm using metrods1.8.ca as my DNS server. Okay. Now if I do, I don't know, mail.google.com, it resolves the IP address for me. Okay. So I've got an IPv6 address of 2607 blah 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 and 142 blah blah blah. This is just giving me by default an A record. If I type question mark, I can actually get a help file from NS lookup, and it'll tell me a little bit of what my options are for changing things. I can use the set command to change my query type This is the same as type, so I can use query type for type. It's the same thing. I can make A record requests, I can make quadruple A record requests, a combo of them, any C name, which is aliases, MX, which is what we're interested in, name server pointer, start of authority, and serve values. Okay, so these are all different DNS records that we can do. So in NSLOOKUP, I can set type equal to MX. Okay, now when I do mail.google.com, it's going to do an MX query. Okay. So it says the server that I'm querying is MetroDS1. For Google.com, it's giving me these answers: dnsadmin.google.com. Okay. If I want to do gmail.com, here there's a reason why I put mail.google.com. Because this is not a domain, this is a host. What you actually want to do with an MX query is specify the domain name. Okay. So if I type just the domain, I get back a different answer. Okay. So when you're testing and you're using an MX query, you're not looking for a host. You're looking for a list of mail exchange servers that you can deliver mail to, and that is what our SMTP server is going to do when it wants to deliver mail outside the organization. Okay. So you can see that Google here is offering a number of different servers. There's Alt3, Alt2, Alt1, Alt4, and Gmail SMTP. Okay. And there's numbers associated with them so that we can decide which one to use based on priority. Okay. And if one of those is not accessible, we can go to the next one, that kind of thing. We're not going to set up multiples. We're just going to stick with one. But if you're in a large environment like Google, where they're hosting a lot of people, they need uptime, they're going to have multiple redundancies put in place. Okay. So let's try inmate.ca. Primary name server looks like MetroDS1 still. They don't really give a lot of details though beyond that. Interesting. Oh yeah, that's probably because they're not hosting their own mail, right? So if we do Outlook.com, we'll get something. There we go. So Nate isn't using itself to handle its mail. It's just passing things over. Okay. On the other hand, Outlook does give us multiple different servers that we can deliver to. Okay. So mail exchange, it's probably something you've never used before. You're going to use it a lot now, just to troubleshoot issues. What happens is the SMTP server will query DNS to get this information and then use it to deliver. Okay. Our goal in this assignment is to get Linux being able to successfully query DNS to get a mail exchange server to deliver to our Edgeron server. Okay. Now, typically what you're dealing with when you do get these values, they're external facing servers only. So there could be internal mail servers which you have no idea about. They're just not published on the internet through DNS. Okay, receiving mail. Once email is delivered to the destination server, it's going to sit in the mailbox. Okay. And then the user has to retrieve it. When they retrieve it, they have two open standard options, POP3 and IMAP. POP3 is very old school, and if you're working with, I would say these days ISPs support both. In the old days, the ISPs preferred that you use POP3 because it really required very little of them to offer that. They didn't have to store a lot of your data. IMAP, on the other hand, everything happens on the server, much like with Outlook. Okay. So they do typically offer both these days, but POP is usually the default unless you're asking for something extra. And beyond configuring these settings, most people don't really notice the difference anyways, unless their hard drive crashes or something like that. Okay. From an administrative point of view, they are quite different because all the data in IMAP still resides on the server for the most part. Okay, you're just kind of keeping copies on the client side, but you're also keeping copies on the server. With POP3, as soon as the client connects and downloads its mail, it gets wiped off the server. Okay, that's the typical behavior. So POP3 is much simpler to administer. It's also a much simpler protocol. There are no folders. There's no hierarchy or substructures. It's just flat, just a collection of messages, right? And you don't get to organize it, really. So they just come in the order in which they were delivered. That's pretty much it. The default behavior is to delete the email off the server once the client application is downloaded. You can change that on the client side. You can actually tell it, wait, keep it. Okay. So that can make it look a little bit more like an IMAP server, but you still don't have that advanced functionality of subfolders and searching and headers and stuff like that. Okay. Now POP3 was designed with the idea that really you would have intermittent connections. So you have road warriors who are using dial-up infrequently to get their mail. Then they're answering their mail offline, and then they use dial-up again to send it back out. That was the old way of doing things. And it still has some uses, but it's really mostly been replaced by IMAP. If a user notices the difference. Okay. Now it uses port TCP 110. By default, it's also text-based, just like SMTP, so we can interact directly with it. On the Linux system, I just took a screenshot from the sample images, where we're doing, instead of Telnet, I chose to just do Netcat, just so that I could show you Netcat, because I like the name. This is it's actually a tool that can be used for probing ports, and it's a bit more advanced than Telnet. So we're netcatting into mail.mailbuddy.com on port 110, very similar to a Telnet here. And it comes back and says, hello there. And then every time there's a plus, that's the server, pretty much. Or there's a code, right? And every time there's not a plus, it's me typing something. So it's saying, hi there, and it's waiting for me to do something. And so I have to type in a special code. I type user, and then what my username is. Okay. And then it goes, okay, that's an all right username, but I need your password. I type pass, that's a command, and then I give my password. Okay. And then it goes, okay, you're logged in. So in other words, I authenticated correctly. Okay. Here it is actually checking if I can log in. Now, all of this is happening clear text over the network. So there's no security in this, and never has been. Okay. Then after that, once I'm logged in, it's waiting for me to do something. I tell it to list all the mail I have, and then it goes, okay, and it tries to do something. And if it stops working at this point, it's saying there's a reason why you're not following this, your client's not following the standard. But even Netcat is able to use it. So it tells me I've got one message with 451 bytes in it. And after that, I just quit. So I'm just checking whether I have connectivity, right? And then it just says goodbye. So very polite. That's pretty much how I described it here, but that's just for future reference. These are some of the commands that you can use in POP3 if you want to look around. I'll kind of mention a couple of things here. There's the APOP command, which is only slightly more secure than not using using no encryption at all. Essentially, this is taking an MD, I think it's an MD4 hash of your password, and that's what you provide as your password. Okay. For authentication. That's not much better than providing a password, because anybody who's sniffing the network could just reuse that value, and they could still get into your account. Okay. But back in the old days, there was a criticism about POP3 being clear text. This was their first really lame attempt at introducing some security. Okay. Now, real security comes when you actually wrap all of this in an SSL tunnel. That's really what you need to do. Okay. Stat will just give you a summary of the size and number of the messages. List will show you the messages in numeric order. Retrieve will actually let you view a message. Okay. But once you retrieve it, it's going to be deleted from the server. So just be aware of that. Retrieve will show you the message, then you do have to delete it, but clients actually do delete it, typically for you. You have to tell the clients not to do it. quit ends the session, which is what we did. Okay, so Exchange does support the use of POP3 if you don't have an Exchange-capable client. So if you're not using Outlook, you can connect in through POP3. Some SMTP servers come with POP3 as a buddy protocol. So you can kind of like, you can do both at the same time on the same server. SendMail and XIM are examples of SMTP servers that don't offer POP3. Qmail does offer POP3 as an option. They call it QPOP, I think. So with these servers, you have to come up with another POP3 service, and that's why I kind of mixed and matched with Postfix. Postfix can do POP3, but I wanted to just show that you don't have to. You can do whatever you want. So we did Courier Mail as POP3 and IMAP, and we did Postfix for SMTP, and everything will still work. Okay. Other POP3 servers, there's some other ones here if you're interested. Honestly, it doesn't matter that much. I had a lot of fun with Qmail, but in the day, but I wouldn't swear by anyone over any other. Now, Google actually created their own IMAP server, so that's kind of interesting. They didn't create a POP3, but they have implemented their own IMAP. So POP3 uses clear text password authentication, APOP. It is an MD5 hash. They use an MD5 hash if you have that functionality. It's slightly more secure, but really Start TLS is the extension which you really want for security, and we're not going to use any of that because we actually want to be able to see the commands. Okay. Once you introduce TLS, you can't use Telnet. Okay, unless you're able to type binary. It won't work, right? It makes everything binary at that point. No more text-based interactions. So most ISPs do offer TLS encryption, at least externally. Okay, they may not offer encrypted POP3 or IMAP internally because they feel they control the entire environment. Okay. So just be aware of that, and that can also help them when they're troubleshooting too. IMAP stands for Internet Message Access Protocol. This is a bloated mess. It's not a criticism, it's just an understood fact. So it was designed to add features that POP didn't have. Clients can issue commands directly off the server. They can copy stuff locally, but they don't have to. Okay, everything can be done on the server. What that means is that you're storing a lot more on the server. You're putting a lot more demand on the server. But it allows for things like hierarchical folder systems, search capability, and from what I've heard, the search algorithms that are used are not very good in the open standard. I'm sure Google, when they're offering their own standard IMAP, like they're running their own IMAP service, they're using a better search functionality, right? Partial touch of messages, so you can just see the headers, just see the subject lines, essentially. And the simultaneous connection of more than one client per mailbox. So I can have sessions open to the server on multiple clients at the same time. I can have it on my phone, I can have it on my laptop. POP3 doesn't allow that. Okay. POP3 expects brief connections from clients to download email. IMAP allows for you to kind of choose whether you have a persistent connection or if you go offline. And the port is different. It's on port 143. Okay, but it's still text-based. We don't go into the commands as much, really. It's got a lot more features, so it's got more complicated commands and more numerous ones. Okay. It has received some criticism for being inefficient and lacking the enforcement of standards. So they'll say like, your server shall do this, but there's no real statement in the protocol about what happens if they don't do that. How does it get handled, right? Which means that people can decide not to implement certain features, and there's no consequence, and it causes confusion with clients. Developers are then just the way that they think, they're like, how do I handle this problem, and then they have to make up their own way of handling it, which leads to confusion, right? Now, it does make up for many of the flaws that POP3 was criticized for, mostly the lack of features. They're just not always implemented in the nicest way. Now, IMAP sessions can be established raw with a Telnet client. We're not really going to do that here, just because I figure you got enough of that just with POP3 and FTP, and I don't want to kind of clobber you over the head with it. So IMAP is clear text, but it does support start TLS, which POP3 also does. And here's some commands that you can use. This is a small subset of all of the commands. Okay. So you can log in, supply your username and password, make folders, delete folders, list folders, search. Search can make the mailbox jump up, the server jump up and down a little bit because it's not that efficient. Basically, there's a lot more that you have to do as an individual, Telnet connector. Most open source services, they do offer POP3. They'll also offer IMAP at the same time. So QMail is one exception to that. They offer a POP client, but they don't offer an IMAP client. And Exchange does offer IMAP for clients as well as POP3. Many webmail, if you have a webmail service like Gmail, they're using IMAP. Like that's really what it means. Okay. So if you have any kind of folder structure, that's pretty much the protocol they're using, and they're slapping a web front end, GUI front end in front of it. So we're going to use Courier IMAP with a Thunderbird client. I'll say honestly, if you can't get IMAP working for whatever reason, it's not that it's that hard, but if something goes wrong, I'm perfectly okay with you using POP3. I don't really care. Okay. I just wanted to give you a little experience with each of them. So don't sweat it too much. If your IMAP client blows up on you, there should be a POP3 client in there too, and you should be able to set up with that, and things would still be fine. Okay. All right. End of Linux mentions. We're done. And next class, I'm going to talk about DNS, because DNS is a big part of the troubleshooting that we're going to do. Okay. Questions?